but I'm just like, you wouldn't want me to make whacker.
Just come stand next to me, Laura. Hello and welcome to Eat Art Space. We're here live from the art opening, and we're going to talk to artist Laura Bowman for a moment. In addition to all of these other lovely people. Say hello, everybody. Just wave. Very cool. So, Laura, take a deep breath and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started making work.
There's some people here.
There's people here. Oh my gosh.
We love you, Laura. My background and how I got started. My background is actually in sculpture, welded metal sculpture. So that was, a good 30-some years ago.
You can talk to them too. You don't have to talk to them.
I know. I feel like, am I looking at you? Am I looking at them?
No, you're looking at the people who are here.
Okay, good. That makes it a lot easier because I wasn't sure where to point my attention.
No, right over here. Talk to these people. This is your audience.
So that was how I got started. I went to ETSU in 1989 to 93 and studied sculpture and got married just a few years out of school and started having a family, and I only did a little bit of artwork here and there as my kids were little, and I guess about maybe 15 years ago I started playing with art again more seriously, and I guess it just developed from there. But the strangest evolution of this particular work was that it started with a workshop at our homeschooling group where a friend of ours had done a hemp bracelet workshop. And the books she had, I got so excited about them, I went and I bought them, and I started making bracelets, and I just fell in love with the actual knot, just the knotting. And I was always making little bracelets, and eventually I started doing weaving, and I thought, I'm going from making bracelets to weaving, and I'm gonna become a weaver. And I went to John C. Campbell and learned about weaving, real weaving. And I just came back to the comfort of the knots, the less structure. Weaving, there's a lot of rules. And
we don't like rules.
I'm so good with a lot of rules. So I still really enjoy the process of weaving, and sometimes it'll show up here and there, but for the most part, I just really love the organic process of knotting and how I can take it and, as you can see, in any direction and do what I want with it. When I tell people that, they don't always believe me because they don't understand how that's done, but it's an easy but complex process. The complex part is just me. Because I have these ideas that I want to turn these very simple knots into. And so when I first started doing this type of work, they were smaller things. And
you want to pick that up and you can show people?
Oh, it's so heavy.
It's so heavy.
It is. It's deceivingly heavy. There were smaller pieces, and at the time that was the largest I'd done, that piece over there. And I let them sort of form organically. I just let them happen. But over time, once I actually knew the process more, I figured out that I can actually purposely create a design that's in my mind and not just let it flow and meander into whatever it became.
Is there a moment in the gallery where we can see that start to emerge for you, or do you think that it started out?
Yes. I think that it went from this type of work and this work here, which is similar to these pieces. And I think it was when I worked on this piece behind you, the only piece that I've ever made that has an armature in it, which is those rod-shaped pieces that go across. A lot of people think I have wire or something creating the sculptural, but it's just knots. It's string and knots and tension. The tighter the knot, the stiffer the coils will be.
You're doing great.
But that piece was when I started to put more purpose and forethought and planning into the pieces. So I think I'm pretty sure that's that's where it began. And there's so many pieces kind of missing here that I'm trying to remember that there were some other pieces that kind of led to that. But as far as what's in here, I think that's the most.
Have you kept track of how many pieces you've made in total? No idea.
I mean, I'm sure
no idea how many
down.
knots you've made.
Oh, God. Billions. Because if you look at this from far away, you might not realize it, but the knots are actually just millimeters, if that's correct. Who knows about measurements? I don't know. But if I'm using a much thicker thread or yarn, then obviously it goes a lot faster. But I tend to gravitate towards string, like crochet string thread, which is really tiny, because I really love that I can actually create a texture that you can see and a design that you can see in a pattern, whereas the thicker yarns that are like more fuzzy, that I like to use for accent colors and for just that little pop of texture, those you can't really see the knot, if that makes sense. The string, you can see the knot. You can see the different, like if I go this way 4 times and then this way 4 times, it starts to create a hatch pattern. So.
You guys are all free to chime in with any questions. Oh,
I do have a question. So, as you're describing this, I'm curious how you conceive of the work that you're doing. You know, because you're saying the knots are so tiny, like it's almost like pointillism. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, for any of the given pieces there, do you have a general concept in your head of what you want it to look like as a finished piece?
Yes. And I brought my sketchbook in case anyone was curious to see.
Yes.
My glasses are starting to fog up.
Behind the scenes.
If anyone was curious to see, I don't do like a drawing for every single piece, but if I have an idea, I like the piece that I made just before this one that is very similar. You all may have seen it. It's sort of green and red. Those are pretty much the only colors I think that were in it. That piece is owned by another artist elsewhere. But I actually got that idea in the middle of the night and got up and drew the idea out for that. And so I used a similar design for this piece. But so I don't know if y'all will be able to see this, but it's usually kind of just like I draw a sort of a sketchy little thing, and I'll have lots of words and lots of arrows. And sometimes I'll sketch something out that I'm like, oh, this is a great idea, and I'll do it, but it takes so long to do a piece that sometimes by the time I come back to my sketchbook, I'll see it and I'm like, I don't know what that is. I have no idea what that is. My sketch for that piece was really clear in my mind. It's
this exergy back here with the one that to me looks like an actual like alien form.
That is the one piece that I get the most interpretations. People say they see creatures, or they'll see the female figure, or
it's the Rorschach test of
and I think
textile art.
That's because of the symmetry. I think that really is because of the symmetry. That our brains can more easily see objects, which is part of the Rorschach test, when it's symmetrical. So that one actually took place over a couple of pages, and it's got like red or blue, and I'll have the colors that
hang on, let me zoom into that right there. That's like,
so this is, can you see?
Yeah, I can see the piece right here. I'm gonna flip the other way, but you need to show that to the rest of the group, like show and tell.
I'm gonna pass this around.
Yeah,
this is where I was working on my daughter's first tattoo. This second star to, what is that? Second star to the Peter Pan?
Second star to the right.
Yeah, second star to the right.
Oh, we have a question from the online audience.
Yay!
Do the strings/yarns inspire your designs, and where do you find your materials?
People sometimes just like to get rid of yarn and string, and they give it to me, like Jocelyn. Jocelyn, some of the yarn she gave me is in that piece. But yes, I do. Sometimes I will see yarn and I get really excited. Like recently we were at Habitat for Humanity Restore looking for cabinets, but there were these bins and bins of yarn and string and crochet thread, which I really love, and I was like, eh. Because I made a promise to myself just for practical purposes, because I'm getting on so many tangents.
It's okay.
I wasn't going to buy any more threads, yarns, anything, and plus we had a mission, and I didn't want to get distracted, so I didn't buy that. But usually I see that, and my mind starts to think, oh, that would be a really, really cool, what I call the base color. Like the base color on this is white, the base color on this one is gray, that one is that color. You know, it's like I'll pick out a certain color, and it'll usually be cotton or wool that I want to be the base. And or I'll see a color or a texture, and I think, oh, that would be really cool to go in this idea. And sometimes I'll build an idea around that color. But most of the time, the idea comes in my mind as just swirls and lines, and then I try to get that out of my head onto paper, and artists know that's fun. And then there's the figuring it out, because when I have an idea like this one, I knew that I'd be starting with the circle, but some of the things like out here and out like that, I'm like, okay, well, how do I make that happen? How do I get from this knot that I started with and work out and work out and work out and go until I'm here? And with this piece, I actually ended up doing this circle and this circle separately and attaching them, which I haven't really done that since that piece.
Okay, so this piece back here, the wave,
that
has separate things
has
that
a
were
couple of
joined
separate
together.
things. But normally I just work, I start in a spot and then I just work. This one, I don't know if I consider that one to have an attachment on it, because the piece at the bottom wasn't built separately. I just added strings to the piece like I normally would and continued to work after I thought I was finished. So I don't really technically count that as an added on, because I didn't make the added on piece separately, if that makes sense. I just continued working on it because I decided it wasn't done. I kept looking at it like, it's not done. I'm warm.
You're doing great.
So where are we in my story?
We're taking questions.
Oh, okay.
Taking questions from the audience.
Well, so if anyone's interested in looking at some of the
Why don't you pass that around? Because I have a question that can prompt you.
This is actually of the piece that's on the wall over there. I've got them tabbed, but like there's some personal things in there, so I'm kind of like,
just stick to the tabs, everybody.
Tabs.
Stick to the tabs.
Not anything deeply personal or embarrassing. It's just
Not something you usually just share around.
like my outlines of like, who are my influences? I don't know.
So I had a
question?
I had a question about the length of the process and what that does to your thinking about the piece. Is there somebody else? Brian, you got a question? I heard an
That was me.
Oh, okay.
I was like months and months.
Okay.
Months and
Like I know it takes months and months and months, but how do you think that influences your thoughts and feelings about your work, as well as like how the heck do you decide on the name for the thing that you've just spent so much time on?
It's a really deep like incubation period of if I'm working from an idea that I had in my head and a sketch, I will tend to kind of, I'll look at the sketch and look at the piece, and sometimes I will allow it to change a little bit if I feel like if I feel like what's happening in the drawing is not even physically possible. That has happened before. I've had to start over, and other times I lay in bed at night making knots and working through things in my mind to try and figure out how to do an
I want to
idea.
see that video.
Yeah, I do too. So as far as like my relationship to the piece as the time goes on, I think it's just an intensity builds of hating it at some point and then absolutely falling in love with it. I remember there was a time when I and it was even before doing this, when I really like did some work that I really liked, and I used to think that it was really arrogant to say that you loved your own work, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's it just didn't feel like that was something you were supposed to say out loud. Just, oh, I just really love my work. But one thing I have given myself permission to do over the years is to love my work and to not go, oh gosh, everything I make just sucks, or other people's work is so much better. And one thing I trained myself to do is to get on Instagram and open up my Instagram account, my art account, and pretend like I'm not the artist. And look at it like I'm seeing it for the first time and it's not mine. And how do I feel about it? Am I still really excited about it? Do I think, So I found that when I did that, it really helped me be able to give myself permission to love my work and to say out loud that I love my work and to feel really proud of it without feeling like a boastful, arrogant person, because I think we've been taught that you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to be braggy about yourself or your kids or your, like anything. We're taught to be humble and not.
It doesn't count if it's not, if you're loving it or something.
Yeah, I don't know. Like there's this thing that artists are supposed to just like constantly compare themselves to others and be down on themselves. And so I was just like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to fall in love with my work, and it feels good. It feels good to look at it and get excited still. So that's how you know you're doing something, I think, that really matters to you, is if you still get excited about it after years and years of doing it, especially when it can be really monotonous. They'll say like, you must have so much patience, and I'm just like, no. It's the only thing I've ever really had a tremendous amount of focus for. Excuse me.
So, any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Question.
Sketches in that book that you have to plan on revisiting and make a project out of?
Do I?
Yeah.
Yes.
Extra a lot of material just in there.
Yes. Yeah, there is actually. I get a lot of ideas when I'm laying in bed. So there is actually a piece in there that is after while I was working on that I drew out, and it's actually really big. It's like something that kind of starts up here and it's kind of like a funnel shape that comes down, that has really defined ribs through the middle, and then designed knots, and there's like pops of color. It's kind of like this piece, like an evolution of that one, but with more defined shape. This is more flowy.
You have some work that stands alone that you've done over the years. They don't hang on the wall.
Oh yeah, the sculpture.
And so, would you be able to incorporate those ideas into something like that?
I have a lot of the sculpture pieces have like wire, and then I weave on the wire, and they're 3-dimensional. And but I've never done the knotting and intricate work on a sculpture. It's like my brain is like, the sculptures are for weaving.
Okay.
And the pieces that go on the walls is for knotting. I'm not sure if I ever will, especially as I'm kind of like downsizing my life. I'm not sure if I will go big again as far as something that sits in the middle of the room, but I don't know. Who knows? But I know you had asked something.
I asked something else, but these people are here and they don't ask you things very often, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So like, this is the first time that I'm seeing your art, and it's awesome, by the way. The one thing that I noticed, the first thing that I noticed when looking at it is you kind of flip-flop a lot between, it seems to me like a love of like micro chaos and macro type structure, and then you flip-flop a lot, especially after seeing your notes. I'll see some things that are like very, very micro structure and very macro chaos, right? Can you kind of talk about how you conceptually think about that dichotomy between structure and chaos, and vice versa?
That's a great question.
Cosmic questions.
I actually do address chaos a little bit in my artist statement. I don't know if it's in this one or not, but
There's a little
I
bit.
don't know. I'm not sure if how I'm going to interpret your question, but your observation of the macro and micro chaos, it is all about tension and anxiety and feeling like things really spiral out of control, but my desire, because I really need to control a lot of things, and I really work on that, and it's really hard, but the need to control, and I think that's where some of the micro, very controlled, tight, smaller areas, because there is that element of my personality that is so just neurotic and uptight and all of that, but then there's this other part of me that is not. I think everybody kind of has that, you know.
Well, the other day, like just earlier, you just said we hate rules. So it's like
Hate rules, love structure.
hate rules, love structure.
There you go.
I
Yeah.
don't think it's about rules or structure.
Ah.
It's more of about situations, emotions, people, myself, as opposed to a list of instructions on how to do something, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's more of a need to control life. And doing this type of work, it really helps with a lot of that anxiety, and I kind of like funnel it into that because it helps me to, especially if I'm listening to like music or a podcast while I'm working. If I'm working and not listening to something, my mind tends to do the spiraling instead of the work, and so I tend to listen to keep myself focused on what I'm doing, and it helps me not feel so anxious. But I'm not really sure if I'm like getting exactly what you're seeing, but as far as design, I think it's just trying to find a balance of those two elements that feel good to me. And you know, if someone's coming from a very different type of art background or interest, they might look at it and go, well, this is just a hot mess. And that's okay too, because I'm a little bit of a hot mess.
Well, I think it's interesting to me because you mentioned that, for example, the work that you're featuring today took you 10-some months, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like as a person who doesn't do this, right, it makes sense to me that how you're feeling in the moment when you're making it. Like if you have a long form painting or like very short work that you're working on is totally influenced by how you're feeling in that moment and your inspiration for that moment. But when you have much longer pieces, it's interesting to me how there might be little pockets where it's very well controlled and very, very well structured in that area.
Yes.
But then you have like maybe the whole piece is very chaotic, or some of your pieces are very, very organized but they're chaotic. You just got
Yes, that I was very much more aware of that on this piece because I knew that I was repeating a theme throughout. Like I was repeating these little like sort of eye shapes throughout, and depending on what type of string or yarn I was using, depending on my mood, depending on whatever, those individual parts could definitely be very different, but you don't want them to all be the same anyway, so it kind of works out. And that brings me to the part of the question that you had.
Oh,
is like
yeah.
about naming.
Mm-hmm.
And about how everything progresses over a long period of time. What are we doing? Go ahead, Sharon.
No, you're fine. I just need an arm break, and I'm trying to balance this live.
A lot of
It's not
times
gonna work.
there are things that are going on
It's okay.
in life that will influence what it actually ends up being named. Like this piece being Coalescent, there was a lot of things going on because I started on this piece right at the beginning of the pandemic. Right after I put this show up, that was to show this piece to the public for the first time. And so that show was kind of shut down, and wasn't seen by very many people, and that was really, really hard. And a lot of things happened last year for a lot of people. I lost my sister, his daughter, his oldest daughter. My business, I do events, social events, so that was obviously out. So there was a lot of loss, but at the same time, life was sort of moving me into a direction that I'd been wanting to go for a while anyway. In fact, in 2019 at our summer camp, during our first staff meeting, I said to everyone, I think 2020 is going to be the last year of camp. Oops. It ended up being 2019. And we didn't get to really have that proper goodbye and that last hurrah. And so we kind of life just kind of coalesced towards this new phase of life. And I think that piece for me will always be about unintended directions that we go in life. But we're still in control of those choices, but they are definitely, some of those are being made for us in life that we don't really have any control over, and we have to decide how we're going to use that choice that was made for us to, sort of dictate the next part of life. And that's what that piece is about. So things that are happening, they're going on in the world while I'm working on something definitely has an effect. I know algae bloom was about the environment and a lot of things were going on. A piece that before that was called Vortex, and I was working on it during the polar vortex that we had. So that definitely kind of happens. Real life plays into the meaning. I don't think I've ever really made artwork that is like, oh, this is the deep symbolism or meaning of something. Usually the symbolism and meaning becomes imbued into the piece by my experiences during the time that I'm making it.
Shazam!
I hope that made sense.
I have this whole visual now of this, like somebody needs to make a short film with Laura, like plucking these ethereal things out of the universe. Like here's a piece of spider web, and I don't know, but this I just picture you're knotting the fabric of the universe into these pieces.
Oh
almost.
Shoot! What's the name of shoot?
No, but it feels
is it the Fates that do that?
Yeah. I did a piece on the 3 Fates, and she wove my headpiece for me, and I placed second in that competition, and it was the headpiece, definitely.
Nice.
No, but it does. It just, you think of the 3 Fates or the 3 Narns in Norwegian mythology, and just, I don't know. I love that.
I think I at one point I had a very lengthy part of an artist statement that went into all of the fates and the weaving and life and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, what's so fascinating to me about work that's like this is that you look at Laura's work and you don't see any of this personal story or this gut-wrenching stuff or any of that. It's interesting formally in and of its own, and I personally also make not to be like, and that doesn't matter, but but just to say there's a certain quality of what's going on with your work where and it could be because knots are mathematical and there's something fundamental that it really does touch on in terms of universal structure. I think about it and make connections to computer science and emergent theories and all this other stuff. So it's you're working in a mode that naturally functions that way. But you just have a unique devotion to the process and a persistence of focus that is what the remarkable piece that you bring to that. So that to me is what makes these pieces exceptional. There's my thesis statement for a PhD on something. I don't know.
That you mentioned math because I really like the Fibonacci sequence, and I've actually woven a piece that my daughter has in her room that the counting was those numbers, and sometimes I will do that if I'm doing something that I want to look sort of random, but controlled chaos. I will use that.
like yes.
I will use that sequence, and it's usually very subtle and just in very like in little tiny pieces, little parts, and I don't think anybody would ever be able to find it because it's it's so.
It's secret.
It's an Easter egg.
It's just,
that is a really, one of those things about art is there are so many little details that no one will ever see that's underneath, and it's that way with, what I'm currently working on, which isn't art at all, but it's, my bus. So much happening underneath that took a year that no one will ever see. And art is kind of, that way too. Like, paintings, they do the x-rays of them and they see all those layers that no one ever saw. And when people ask me about, what is this? Is this a wire? I'm like, that's just a whole bunch of strings on the inside of a knot. So.
Which could be a metaphor for all the stuff that's going
Well,
on
I
inside
mean,
of
it
a
is.
human.
I talk about that a lot.
everything is metaphor.
Yeah,
About
exactly.
the internal chaos that I feel because of anxiety and all of that stuff, that I'm trying to have a tremendous amount of control on the outside that appears to other people like I've got it together, except for you. And you all know the truth. But there is that, trying to have that appearance of having everything together, and to me that's kind of what I'm doing here, is that I know, especially if you ever look at the back of the piece, there's a lot of hot mess behind, but everything on the surface is clean and, it's tight. Any more questions?
Any final questions? Because I think we need to give Laura a break.
Because I will, like I told you, I will talk. But
Yeah, she'll talk.
You had
Listen
wanted
to her
know
talk.
about like origin stuff at one time, and I wanted to talk about.
Yes.
There are a couple of artists that I found years and years ago. You can hand it off. That I found years ago, it wasn't necessarily their work, but there was something about a certain technique that they were doing, and I was like, I just want that little piece of information to know how to do that so that I can do something obviously completely different. There's an artist, Mariana Prosopio, and she is who I learned to do these circles from. I didn't actually learn how to do them from her, but she had this series of lamps where she did the macrame circle that went around and got bigger. And I had to search all over the internet to find out how to start a macrame circle. And once I learned that one little technique of how to take just 3 strings and put it on another string and then bring it around and pull it together, once I learned that little technique, it just opened up that tidal wave. And then there was another artist, her name is Marissa Iobi, and years ago she did these necklaces, and they always, on the ends of them, they would have these tendrils. And I was like, I need to learn how to make that macrame technique of these tendrils. And so once I learned how to do that, and I learned how to do the circles, I started to form these designs like this and this that were just like circles and tendrils and circles and tendrils. And so that was like a very, very root-based beginning. And as far as like the concept that macrame could be taken to large sculptural form was Jacqueline Surdell. And she does sort of weaving, knotting, big rope pieces. I have a lot of different artists that I've gotten inspiration from, but it's mostly technique that I learned, and not necessarily, their art inspired me. It was usually the technique that I needed to learn to do the ideas that I had. So those 3 particular artists, I just wanted to mention those.
Very good shout outs.
And like I said before, I always thank family, and friends, and community, small local galleries here. Some people, Dick Nelson, Terry Dosher, other galleries that we had in this town. Oh, Carlotta.
Oh, yes. Tipton Gallery.
Gallery. So those 3 big influences in the downtown area supporting local artists.
Yes.
Always been very generous.
Shout out to them.
So, yes, definitely shout out.
Yay! Well, with that, I'm going to close the live feed, and but people can hang out for as long as they want. It's all good. So, wave at the camera. Yeah, oh yeah, the food. Paellas Trinidad and Laura Bowman. Shazam!
Thank you all.